Welcome to Skagit Land Trust 30th Annual Membership Meeting. I'm Mark Hitchcock, currently serving as board president. Our board and staff are honored you have joined us for this meeting and celebration. I want to thank all of the members for the support that they've given us this year and in years past. Also to all of you conservation easement donors, that's our reason for existence. Thank you for participating. And for our volunteers who help us conduct our programs and maintain the properties that we've purchased. For tonight's agenda, first we're going to start off with board elections. Then we're going to follow with a presentation of our Blue Heron Award. We're going to then review our year with our Executive Director, Molly Doran. Our various departments have some awards to make. Then we're going to have a conversation on forests with Dave Peterson and Regina Wandler, followed by questions and social time. Now I'd like to hand this off to Jim Glacken, the chair of our governance committee. He's going to conduct tonight's elections. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Mark. It's my honor to introduce the slate of board members that have agreed to renew their service on the board, and also to introduce one new board member for approval by the membership. So we have 4 members who are renewing. First, Keith Wiggers. It is hard to know where to start when talking about Keith's contributions to the board. He has been a member since 1992. He's one of 3 founding members of the board. He can be counted on for sage property and land advice, negotiation with landowners, policy and staffing, and even tractor work, and anything else needed to keep the organization up and running. Keith is a retired veterinarian and serves on the land, facilities, and governance committees. Secondly, Kathy Thornburg. Kathy joined the board in 2019. Kathy has a master's degree in marine ecology from the University of Washington, has worked for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and has retired recently from Skagit, Snohomish County government, working on water quality and environmental monitoring, public education, and habitat stewardship. Kathy currently serves as vice president of the board. Mark Hitchcock. Mark is currently serving his second tour of duty on the Skagit Land Trust board. After a number of years off the board, he's returned in 2019. Mark is a retired forestry consultant with degrees in forest science from the University of Washington and Yale University. He's previously served on the Skagit Conservation District Board. Mark is currently serving as president of the board. And finally, myself, Jim Glacken. I am a real estate broker in Mount Vernon. I joined the board in 2016 and have served from that time on the land development and governance committees. I've also served one term as president of the board. I'm a member of the Skagit County Conservation Futures Committee, which administers the Farmland Legacy Program to conserve farmland in Skagit County. Our new member, Kirk Johnson. Kirk is a former planner for Skagit County for 19 years, public policy consultant. He's worked as a legislative assistant in Washington state government, and has served since 2017 our Skagit Land Trust Public Policy Committee. So with these 5 candidates, please indicate your approval of this slate of candidates by voting yay in the chat section. And now, while we wait for these votes to come in, I'd like to say a few words about a couple board members who have retired from the board in this past year. Kurt Miller. Kurt joined our board in 2019. Kurt came to the board with 30 years of experience in land planning and natural resource management and design. Kurt brought to the board a passion for stewardship and management of the lands that the Land Trust acquired and managed. To Kurt, it was always about the protection of the natural habitat for the wildlife that depend on that habitat to survive and thrive. Kurt has stayed on as a committee member of the Stewardship Committee. And finally, John Hunt. John joined our board in 2010, and during that period served as our faithful treasurer. A retired engineer and business executive, John pretty much created our investment policies and structure. He helped grow the trust's investment for stewardship and for our land fund during his time as treasurer by about 800%. He will be sorely missed, but has agreed to remain as a special advisor to the board on financial matters. Now I'm hearing that the slate of candidates has been approved. So thank you for that. And I'm going to turn this back over to Mark.
All right. Thank you, Jim. So now I'm going to present our Blue Heron Award, which is given in recognition of extraordinary dedication to the lands of Skagit County through distinguished service. Thank you very much, Scott, to Skagit Land Trust. I am very pleased to present this year's award to Tim Mans. Tim retired from the National Park Service after 34 years as a park interpreter and program manager. His assignments included North Cascades, Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, Zion, and other areas within the national park system. Tim currently serves on the board of Skagit Audubon Society and is on the Skagit County Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. He also served many years on the Padilla Bay Foundation Board and was a U.S. alternate on the U.S.-Canada Skagit Environmental Commission. Tim and his wife Brenda have volunteered with Skagit Land Trust for many years. Their longest involvement with the trust has been as volunteer stewards for the Barney Lake Conservation Area since the early 1990s. Most recently, Tim served as a bird guide for our early morning swanrise events. Tim has been public policy chair and now serves as our board secretary with near perfect minutes, I might add. Tim helps us connect with Skagit Audubon and other partners, helps our staff design interpretive signs, and helped us by fact-checking our book, Natural Skagit. Please join me in thanking and honoring Tim Mans. Will now have a word to say to us, I hope. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Mark. That's extremely kind of you. And I haven't, it's not really fair. I haven't been given time to speech. So I'll just say that I am very surprised and thank you very much. For both Brenda and me, the Land Trust has for decades now been a very important part of our lives. And it's a privilege to volunteer for it in every way that we can. So thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Molly Dorn, the Executive Director of Skagit Land Trust. Thanks so much for being here tonight. I have a year in review that you helped us accomplish to go through, but first I wanted to thank a few people. First up is Martha Frankel. Martha, I hope you're watching. Martha was our office and membership manager for years and retired in the fall and is now a land steward at our Samish Conservation Area, as well as doing many other things like gardening. And Martha, thank you so much. We miss you. I also want to thank the people behind the scenes tonight. So the picture in the lower left-hand corner was our last in-person annual meeting in 2019. And because of the pandemic, we had to move everything online. So Scott Weatherly and Laura Hartner have been the masterminds behind the technology for doing this. And now they're joined by Jazz Strode-Elfont, who has helped tonight to get everything done that you're seeing. And it absolutely would not have worked without them. So thank you so much. Skagit Land Trust recognizes that we live and work on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish people who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. We extend our deep gratitude to the Coast Salish. May we continue to work together as a community to promote the ethical stewardship of these lands. Thank you. So a year in review. This is always the fun part to go through quickly and sort of at a high level, things that you helped us accomplish. And we want to make sure that we can continue to earn your trust. So we want to report back to you. First, though, I want to go through a few people that we lost this year. I'm going to read their names. I didn't have pictures of all of them, but here's a few of the pictures and then we'll read the other names. Phil McCracken, Levon Ream, Linda Hunt, Ann Dersh, Bill Pfeiffer, Saul Spiro, Catherine Carter, Gary Richardson, Janet Ebersole, Glenn Hoff, Betty Ann Morgan, Richard Nelson, Peggy Pear, Mary Pease, Cecil Thomas, Elizabeth Warren, Betty Wright, Arlene French, Nola Beeler, Lynn Folsom, and Barbara Craner. And when I read those names, I think of so many memories of them being in the field with us, or a letter coming in, or opening an envelope from them, or a phone call. Some of them were landowners, some of them were land stewards. We thank them all. They were wonderful people and wonderful gifts to the land. Thank you. Highlights of places that you helped to save. These are, there's many things going on. We always have about 16 projects in the works, but these are the ones that were completed in the past year or are going to be completed like in the next few days. So helping to expand the Samish Island Conservation Area. We bought this property in April of last year. The funding for the purchase was over 400 donations from members and family foundations, many of you out there tonight, from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, a coastal grant, from the Washington State Recreation and Conservation Office Estuary and Salmon Restoration Program, and from Skagit Land Trust. And we want to thank Kari Auden, who was a project lead for this. She was really dogged with this project. It took years of getting the money together and getting things done and getting everybody engaged. And we also thank Steve Squires for hanging in there with us. And he always wanted to see this property protected. So thank you both. The property itself is gorgeous. There's now 100 acres protected at the entrance of Samish Island. It has open space, it has wetlands, it has shoreline on both sides of Padilla Bay and Samish Bay. Next slide. And since we purchased it, we've been getting a lot of you involved to do site cleanup. So here are some before and after pictures of the site. And this is where the house formerly was. And I know that later on in the slideshow, you'll see some pictures of plantings that have gone on there since. And I know just last weekend, there was a planting up there. So thank you so much. Another huge project for us this past year was the March Point Heron addition. Again, this is something that I think Keith Riggers wanted to do probably 25 years ago. And finally, Jane Zillig took the helm of this, and then Kari Auden picked it up, and we added acreage to the March Point Heronry. 200 donors helped us get there, 4 grantors, including 2 March Point industrial businesses, refineries, and Audubon's Martin Miller Fund, all came together for our call to help. It was a pretty fast and furious fundraising to get it done. This is the largest heron nesting colony on the west coast of the United States, so very important to protect all the land that the herons nest on. On the Samish River, we expanded to Bryan, and with a parcel across the road. And this area has also been planted out by many volunteers over the past winter. I think there's something like 200 plants that went in there. So lovely property and full of wildlife. On the Cascade River, we recently received a donation of an exquisite forested property on the river. And this area of the Cascade River has seen a lot of protection. It's right on the edge of wilderness. The yellow pieces are parcels that Skagit Land Trust owns and protects or has conservation easements on. And the green properties are other protections. But as you can see, the river corridor is really staying wild and scenic, and it's just a beautiful area. This is heard it here first sort of news. Anacortes Community Forest Lands. We have been working for the last 2 years. Michael Kirschenbaum has worked with the city and with Friends of the Forest and with others to update and modernize the conservation easement and to make it one easement instead of 36 or 38 different easements. And so they work to get that done. And at the same time, they're going to add 243 more acres to this incredible area. The total acreage of the Anacortes Community Forest Lands will then be 1,933 acres. So well done. You'll be seeing a video tonight about the Devil's Mountain Conservation Easement that Jim Owens worked on with us and granted a conservation easement on. It's exquisite, and I think you'll really enjoy seeing this video. We had another type of property donation this year that was very insightful and future-oriented of Catherine Carter, who passed away this past year, who said, I would like my land to go to the land trust, but not so that it stays protected as my special part of the world. I mean, that would be fine, but that wasn't her goal. She loved her property, but she said, I want you to sell it, and I want you to put that money into some larger conservation project where it can really give back and do a lot of good. And so we are working on that right now. We're hoping to maybe be able to apply it to something like Deception Pass State Park, where we're working on a project, and she loved Deception Pass. So stay tuned to hear about that. And now for stewardship and restoration, we have people that work on our stewardship and restoration, and we have animals that work on our stewardship and restoration. And in the people camp, we have fabulous volunteers. And we're just going to go through a few slides of some of the volunteers, so many, but I just want to scroll through so you can see the type of people, and look at them. They all seem to have a smile on their face. They love it. They have a great time. We have families that are getting out there. We have teams from companies. We have people that have been with us forever, and people that have adopted one property, people that come out to every event, farms, forests, everything. And this last one, that's the Squire's home site planted out just last weekend. And this last slide, Pete and Jim, I think many of you know them. It was great to see them out there. They were out planting out the Squire's property the other day. The other thing that we do with stewardship is we're very aware of that many of the properties we purchase have been used before. They've been developed. And we want to make sure that we reduce, reuse, and recycle. So we put a lot of energy into finding a way to use again things that we need to take down, either because they're in the floodway, too close to the river, or they're past their use. So with these projects, we brought in an individual or companies that can take down the houses bit by bit and sell them or give them away. On Remus Island, anything that could be taken, we put up front and it went. And we also use companies like Lautenbach that will recycle the aluminum and metals and whatnot. We have a great relationship with Lautenbach. Places for people and nature. We know that's a favorite for a lot of you. And there's quite a bit of trail work done with your help this past year. So there's a new trail on Samish Island, which I think many of you have seen. There's a trail down to the beach. And then this time of year, this gorgeous new trail is on the upper part of the property. And it's just lovely right now. On Remus Island, where the house came down, the volunteers over there, Ian and company, built a beautiful bench that is overlooking exquisite wetlands and the barn. And I was out there this last weekend with volunteers, and it is such a serene and lovely place to sit and have your lunch. Up at River, at Heron Field, we are getting a lot of people stopping to see the elk, who have seemed to be more frequent this year out in that field, and they get to see other wildlife as well. And then at Sauk Mountain, we're in the midst of working on a trail that will connect more of our property at Bar Creek. You can go all the way to the top the old way, and that's a long hike. But if you just want to use our trail, by the end of the summer, I hear it will be done. We get the next slide, which is an extension of the trail at Bar Creek, just an exquisite place. Citizen science. The big project this year was getting new cameras into the Heronry, and pretty soon you're going to be able to see this. This is Stacy, who was in charge of this project. There's a solar array in there. A tree climber put 3 cameras up in different trees. There's one of the cameras. These people carried 50-pound bags of cement up through the Heronry to get things cemented in. And the quality of pictures is amazing. And pretty soon you'll be able to flip on a channel on your computer at home and watch the herons nesting in real time. So we'll let you know when that's available. With the youth program, we took a hiatus during the pandemic. It was quite difficult to engage with youth in the outdoors because the schools were, of course, on a mixed schedule. But we've been able to do more with the Colchian community lately. And even during the pandemic, we kept the program going by giving them bags that they could take home and use with their families. For instance, here, these are wreaths that they built in the holiday season. And I know Laura Hartner, our development director, personally went out and cut limbs off of boughs at Bryan and brought them invasive species that they could decorate their wreaths with. And they had a great time making those wreaths. And then we also recently had the Burlington Edison Green Club come out to help us plant. And they said they've just gotten re-engaged after 2 years of not being able to be out there doing that. Justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, that's something the Land Trust feels very strongly about. And one of the ways that we feel we can widen who's in our community, who we give back to, who we include, is by having conservation areas that are right next to urban developments. And our Barney Lake is a perfect example. As you can see in this map, the city of Mount Vernon comes right up to its border. In fact, this map is out of date it comes up even closer than on this map. And a lot of these neighborhoods will be within walking distance of Barney Lake. We're in the next year, the next slide, what we're going to do is have focus groups come out from those neighborhoods and elsewhere and from the schools, and to say, what would you like to see here? Where should the trails go? And then the goal is to create a wildlife viewing area, a trail area at Barney Lake for the neighborhoods. Public policy, a lot of you helped us this year with public policy. We're fully engaged with the fully contained communities. And at least for right now, you helped put that to bed, which is fantastic. Something that we're working on currently is to make sure that sea level rise and climate change gets into our county and our cities and communities planning documents. Because of course, as you can see, this is Barney Lake in November at flood stage. And the next one is, this is on the way to Sandwich Island during flood stage. And it is real, it is here, and we need to be planning for it. So that's one of our current focuses in public policy. During the last year, we tried to stay engaged with you as well as we could. We were able to re-engage with some events like this wonderful art tour. We had the Swan Rise where people got up at, I don't know what hour, what time, but they were out there at 6:30 or 7. I think there were 90 people came through our different Swan Rises to watch the swans at Barney Lake. It was great. We had events out on the land, such as this last summer, and we're going to try to recreate these types of things where we integrate with you and educate with you, but out on the properties. We were able to have outdoor events, and these are some of the things that we'll continue on with. We learned a lot during the pandemic, and being out with you on the land is really important. Of course, we have the best staff. I know I'm biased, but we do. And this next, we're going to put all their names under here. You can read them. You're also going to see pictures of most of them. And I just want to point out, besides staff, we have some other people that help out a lot, besides staff and board and committees. Phil Burry is our counsel, our lawyer, and does most of his work pro bono. He's fantastic. Leslie Maynard does our accounting. She stepped up the plate and got a really complex nonprofit organization, and she's fantastic. Special events, Debbie Enzi does our special events and also helps with that reuse, reduce, recycle, helping us find homes for many things. And our assisted access projects, Jack Hart helps us out. So here we have Karin and Laura and Regina. Here's Michael Kirschenbaum, who's running the show back on the computers tonight. And these are all new staff this year who are fully now part of the team. And our staff also has fun. Next slide, please. I don't know if you were able to see the Illuminate, but they worked on creating this great exhibit. And that little beaver in the right-hand corner now sits in our mantle, which is fantastic. And we were able to have 5 years of AmeriCorps. 3 of these AmeriCorps now work for us or have worked for us for a long time. Regina's now our stewardship director. But we had a staff get together, and some of the AmeriCorps from out of town came, and we were able to have 5 years of AmeriCorps, which was fantastic. Cannot say enough about our exceptional board and committees. They have stuck through this pandemic with us. They're wise, they're fun, they're right there. We have fantastic partners, landowners, members. Here's the pictures of some of those. Couldn't do it without the landowners, the members, you, partners. Thank you so much for helping future generations of our community and wildlife. So now I'm going to have Jonathan Morley come out, who is going to start the program awards with the volunteer award.
Thanks, Molly. Hello, everyone. I'm Jonathan Worley, the 2021-2022 Stewardship AmeriCorps member with the Land Trust. While we're grateful for our many hardworking and enthusiastic volunteers who have helped us complete projects across the county, one in particular stands out for their unique commitment to helping the Trust achieve its mission. It's my pleasure to present the Trust's 2022 Stewardship Volunteer Award to Terry Armstrong. Terry is a regular fixture at our volunteer stewardship events. He's participated in 30 of the 36 work parties that I've hosted since I came on in September, totaling well over 100 volunteer hours. His time and effort have been instrumental to a wide range of projects that we've completed over the last year. Terry always shows up ready to work. It doesn't matter whether it's raining or whether the sun's shining, whether we're on Guaymas Island or upriver in Marblemount, whether we're planting trees or growing blackberry. He's always eager to volunteer. It's also been a real honor getting to know him, including learning more about his prior work with the Peace Corps and the bread baking hobby that he picked up during the pandemic. His volunteering work doesn't end with Skagit Land Trust either. Terry is also a regular volunteer at the NOAA Center, an animal adoption center in Stanwood, where he walks dogs every week. Terry exemplifies what it means to be a good steward, and I know that everyone here on the call tonight is grateful that he's part of our Skagit Land Trust community. So congratulations, Terry, and thank you for everything that you do. I'd like to invite you on to say a few words.
Thank you, Jonathan. Eileen and I moved to Skagit Valley last summer, and I feel very fortunate to have found the Land Trust fairly early on. And I started with the Land Trust about the time that you and Hannah Katz started. And there should be an award for the AmeriCorps Volunteers of the Year, because I want to nominate both you and Hannah. It's been a pleasure getting to know you. Organizations are really run by volunteers for the most part. And I've enjoyed meeting all the volunteers with the Skagit Trust and getting out to properties that I've never seen on my own. So thank you very much for this award. And I will only accept it on behalf of all the volunteers, because I have seen many volunteers over and over and over again. So I'm not the only one that puts in some good work. Thank you.
Thanks again for everything you do, Terry. Now I'd like to pass it on to Hannah Williams to present our Community Outreach Award.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah. I'm the Conservation Areas Coordinator here with the Land Trust, so I help monitor and manage the properties that we own. There's a very special place, island across from Anacortes, with some amazing people that live there. Guaymas Island hosts two conservation areas, Guaymas Mountain and Valley, a 285-acre property with forests, wetlands, agricultural fields, and a mountain trail with wildflowers, as well as Kelly's Point, a 28-acre property with over 3,000 feet of shoreline and an expansive feeder bluff. With all that, it takes a village to care for these lands. Luckily, we have that with Guaymas. The Trust would like to recognize the Guaymas Island community for their continued support, dedication, and stewardship of the Guaymas Mountain and Valley and Kelly's Point properties. Thank you to our neighbors for keeping a close eye on these properties, especially when the ferry is out of commission. To our neighbor, John Hunsler, for his beautiful bench at Kelly's Point. Thank you to our volunteers who have helped remove invasive species and replant native ones at our many work parties. To those who have helped maintain the mountain trail and parking spaces by raking leaves, picking up trash, and carrying buckets of gravel to fill low spots. And thank you to Phil Burton for the gravel to do so. Thank you to all the volunteers who have helped build the mountain, or build and maintain the even in the snow, the many benches on the Guaymas Mountain Trail at Kelly's Point. And to John Petridge for helping mow around the barn last year. We'd also like to recognize our neighbor Glenn Field, who has farmed the valley for a long time with his, and has helped keep the agricultural history of Guaymas alive. Lastly, a very special thank you to our volunteer land stewards who have spent hundreds of hours monitoring and maintaining these properties from the mountaintop to the shorelines and to social media and beyond. Thank you. As you can see from these photos, there's so many folks who have helped steward these properties that I know I'm missing more names. One of our land stewards for Guaymas is Ian Woofenden, who has generously donated his time, labor, and wood to build these trails, the many benches at both properties, and can always wrangle an impressive group together to get a task done. Ian, we would like to thank you for all that you and the rest of the Guaymas community do for the Trust. Ian, I'm inviting you on if you'd like to say a few words.
Hi there, Anna. Thank you. Appreciate it. And you know, Molly said it. It's just fun to volunteer, and I love the wrangling, and I love all the people in our community that come out to help take care of the properties that are part of our community and that we enjoy. So it's a blast to get a crew to haul heavy things up the hill in the snow, and then the satisfaction of making a new feature and taking care of problems on the trail and on the properties. And I think I can speak for all of us that working with the Land Trust staff and other volunteers is just very satisfying. So thank you.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you so much, Guaymas community. I'd like to pass it on to Michael Kirschenbaum for the Land Award.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Kirschbaum. I'm the Conservation Director at Skagit Land Trust. And this is a lot of fun to give awards because we have so many deserving folks. And I have the honor of giving this year's Land Award, or we also call it the Land Conservation Award, to Jim Glackens. Jim, if I could have you join me.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah. Jim, this is a pleasure. We're going to stand closer together. This is a pleasure because Jim has really done everything for the Land Trust. And you joined the board in 2016, Jim, and you've been our board president. You serve on our land committee. You're on our governance committee. You're our representative to Farmland Legacy here in Skagit County. And that's worthy of an award enough. But I think what really has stood out, Jim, is you go above and beyond to help us close projects. Jim has been a real estate professional for quite a few years, and Jim brings those skills to help us really troubleshoot complex real estate projects. It's both technical skill that Jim has that has been invaluable in closing complex projects, but Jim knows the community so well. He's heard of a neighbor or that property owner, and he's making that extra call, and he's problem solving and troubleshooting with us, not just waiting to be asked to help out, but Jim's anticipating this stuff. And it's been invaluable. I've learned a lot from working with you, Jim, not having a real estate background. So we really, really are appreciative of all that you've done. And you symbolize the way that the community, people from all different professions get involved with the Land Trust to kind of move this common vision forward. So thank you very much for everything that you've done. Shake your hand, Jim. I'll let you say a few words.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Yeah, it's just, it's an honor to be connected with such a great organization. As you can see tonight by all the awards, a lot of volunteers. The volunteers make the organization. The staff keeps everybody in line and make sure things work well. And it's just been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Very deserving, Jim.
Thank you.
And we'll bring on back Molly Doran now for the next part of the program.
Thank you. All right, so tonight's presentation is going to be on forest conservation with Dave Peterson and Regina Wandler. But first, we're going to show a couple of videos that were made about different types of forests. And I just was thinking about forests when they asked me to introduce this. And I don't think we can underestimate the importance of forests in the world, but especially where we live. Skagit County has more than 1 million acres of forest. That's amazing in itself. The Land Trust, we manage thousands of acres of forest. Many of you are forest landowners. And if you think about today, I bet every single one of us experienced or used or was a beneficiary of a forest. So did you go for a walk today? Did you hear an owl? Did you make a note to go shopping on a piece of paper? Did you build something? Did you drink water from your tap? Because forests are what clean our water. So the pictures and the videos that we're going to talk about now and the videos that we're going to show are about two different types of forests. And the Land Trust protects wild forests that, as you saw up on the Cascade River, right on the edge of wilderness. And we also help conserve forests in the city of Anacortes, right in an urban area. We plant new forests. Volunteers have been planting forests all over the place for us and with us for decades. We also protect forests that are working for us that provide resources. And Dave and Regina are going to talk a little bit about those different types of forests. But first, we wanted you to watch these two videos. The first one is about the Anacortes Community Forest Lands.
I think the reason the Anacortes Community Forest Lands are so special is because you have 3,000 acres in the middle of a city, and there aren't many cities like that in the entire country. So you have, within that, you have old growth forests, you have 3 lakes, you have an abundance of wetlands, and 50 miles of trails. So there aren't many places that you'll find in the West Coast or in the entire nation that have that. And in 1998, City Council worked with the Skagit Land Trust and the Friends to put together a program called the Conservation Easement Program. And in that process, they took about 1,800 acres that was destined to be either logged or mined or developed in other ways and decided to conserve it because the citizens. The Anacortes Community Forest Lands were a watershed for the city of Anacortes. A fellow named Douglas Almond owned them. The city purchased them in 1919 for the purpose of using them for their water. So they were logged, about 10 to 20 acres a year over time, and used for hunting and all kinds of things that forests were in the 1930s through 1970s. People started to recreate here more and saw the beauty of them, and also realized the conservation value because they saw areas that they valued disappearing. So Ruthie Johns was one of the first hired forest lands manager for the city in the late 1980s. And she started essentially what became the Friends of the Forest with other community members.
The community members who started Friends of the Forest were a passionate group of Anacortes community forest members. Many opposed ongoing logging in the ACFL by the city as both unsustainable and unnecessary. Friends of the Forest advocated to the city and the Forestry Board how much the community valued and relied on these forests. After surveys to the community, the city realized the value of keeping the forest intact and stopped logging in 1989.
So, as I mentioned, Ruthie Johns is the first forest lands manager, and Lee Slotemaker, who later became a teacher in the Anacortes school system, they worked together and created kind of the program that the Friends of the Forest have adopted and grown so well to educate the local community about the value of the forest lands, the habitat in the forest lands, the value to the wildlife, and just for folks to realize it's such a jewel that we need to protect this for perpetuity.
Gene Murphy was one of the co-founders of Skagit Land Trust, but he also helped get Friends of the Forest started. Gene lived here in Anacortes and with other members of the community who recognized that it wasn't enough to have the forest lands just in public ownership. We had to make sure that it was going to stay protected forever. So they worked with Skagit Land Trust to come up with this conservation easement program, which is this permanent binding perpetual agreement that ensures that the forest lands will never be converted, will never be logged, will never be turned into something other than this amazing public land resource that it is now. And it wasn't enough for these citizens just to pay their taxes, to take care of this. They also committed to fundraising $1,000 for every acre to put into this permanent protection status. It's really amazing that much fundraising happened, giving extra to make sure these public lands had this backstop, this conservation easement that ensures that these lands will never be converted to anything other than this amazing, amazing forest land that's a resource for people now and will be forever. So Skagit Land Trust with the Anacortes Community Forest Lands does what we do best. We partner with organizations like Friends of the Forest and with the city of Anacortes, and then we partner with all of the members and volunteers of Skagit Land Trust to help protect this land forever. Really, the Land Trust helps make sure the conservation vision of a community is enacted and is protected forever.
Friends of the Forest has a really inspiring backstory with community members starting it and getting their voices heard by the city of Anacortes, just how passionate people are, the original founding members and the continuing members and the growing membership. Everyone really cares about keeping the ACFL a healthy ecosystem, and it's really cool to see so many involved people supporting something that they get value out of that isn't monetary value. So I think the community support is what inspired me to try and work for Friends of the Forest.
I also want to comment on just the incredible partnership with the Land Trust, Skagit Land Trust, and the Friends of the Forest. You don't see that a lot. You don't see a lot of public-private partnerships that have worked so well over time. And that's just, I think, remarkable and a testament to the great leadership in those organizations as well. They've really stood together and made the partnership real, which is, I think, a benefit to all the people in town who don't realize how good it is, but they benefit from it every day when they come to visit. I think that one thing that we appreciate now is that what we inherited here is due to the stewardship of the Samish Nation and the Swinomish Nation. I mean, they took care of this from time immemorial, and I think it's our turn now to work with Samish and Swinomish and the whole community as the newcomers come and go to protect it in perpetuity. I think that's our goal as a city, and I know our goal with our partners.
Hi everyone. I hope you enjoyed seeing that video and learning a little more about the story of protecting the Anacortes community forest lands. We're excited to share it with you. I know this spring I'll be out and I'll hike the Sugarloaf Trail. And if you haven't done it before, I encourage you to do it too, or to find some of the old growth at the south side of Heart Lake. I'm excited to introduce you to our next video, which will tell a little bit more about the story of protecting Jim Owens' working forest land on Devil's Mountain. Enjoy.
Forests play an important role in everyone's lives. They provide critical goods and services to local communities, including wood, fuel, and clean and abundant water. Forests also store carbon and act as a nature-based solution to climate change. Intact forest provides food, shelter, and travel corridors for a myriad of wildlife species. Skagit County forests are critical natural resource assets that support local livelihoods and economic vitality. Well-managed forests are sustainable. Keeping forests as resource lands also prevents the conversion of forest land to developed land. When longtime member and volunteer land steward Jim Owens approached us about an easement on his 41-acre tree farm, the Trust was honored to help Jim achieve his vision of protecting a place for wildlife and allowing it to forever remain a productive tree farm and a place for all kinds of creatures.
So the Trust is working to see a county where forests remain standing, where urban development, new development fills in our cities and our urban growth areas. Wildlife thrive through these connected lands. Waters remain clean and abundant and protected. And there's economic vitality because there's still these resource lands and wood harvesting.
Jim's Devil's Mountain Tree Farm is adjacent to 300 plus acres of DNR land, and it connects with 8,000 acres of forest resource lands, much of it owned by small forest landowners and small to mid-sized timber companies. Because it is connected to these larger working forest lands, Jim has observed a lot of wildlife on his property.
Yeah, I tried to get a picture of each of our major predators. Black bear.
There's 2 or 3 cougar there.
Yeah, I really hit the jackpot up there. Looks like 4.
And we have over 30 years of working with landowners and helping them develop their vision.
We worked together with Jim to craft this conservation easement. Jim's forest is an important piece of the puzzle. Now we want to expand that conservation to other willing small forest landowners.
So wherever we can get forest land near our urban environments, protected and buffered and safe from development, we can continue to enjoy all the benefits that we get from our forests.
A long-term goal is to protect the core of Devil's Mountain through conservation easements on working forest lands, providing economic, cultural, and social benefits, and supporting a rich diversity of species.
Hello. I'm Regina Wandler, the Stewardship Director at the Land Trust, and I'm here with Dave Peterson, who is speaking with us today about healthy forests and how to think about creating resilient forests. Dave is joining us, and Dave has a lot of background in thinking about climate change science and resilient forestry. Dave has background as a professor at the University of Washington and as a research scientist at the Forest Service Research Station. Dave, thank you for making the time to chat with me today and to share your knowledge with everyone.
Thank you to you and Land Trust for being part of the program tonight. I really appreciate it.
We're here to chat a little bit, like I mentioned, about healthy forests today. Folks probably know Skagit Land Trust has protected over 10,000 acres, and we own over 2,500 acres of forest through the county. I think that's a very low number. I think it's a lot higher than that, actually. But that number is kind of what starts off this forests for us. So we get a lot of questions about what is a healthy forest and how we manage those. And I know that there are a lot of folks who are members who might be on this meeting with us tonight who are also trying to figure out how they can manage their own forests. You can see some images right now of healthy forests, maturing forests from different land trust properties and across Western Washington. There are a lot of different kinds of healthy forests on our properties. We have mature conifer forests, which I think a lot of folks in this area think of as the ultimate healthy forest, and it's what comes to mind. But we also have really wonderful and maturing floodplain forests, and there's some images of those as well. And that's something to keep in mind. A lot of the land trust properties are in the floodplain. So that floodplain forest is actually often what we're really thinking of when we're thinking of what we want our forests to become. And so there are a lot of things that go into a healthy forest.
Yeah, this slide suggests some things that we might think about as being part of a healthy forest. First of all, there's no recipe for this. There's no standard agreed upon definition. If you ask 10 different scientists or resource managers what they thought a healthy forest was, you get 10 different answers. So this is just a list of what we thought were important characteristics that need to be considered when you're doing a restoration project, like the good work that Regina and the Land Trust has been doing here for a long time now. So some of the things we focus on here are the productivity of the site. That includes tree growth and other ecological functions that exist there. We'd also like our trees themselves to be healthy, to be high vigor trees. We like there to be a reasonable amount of diversity, genetic diversity, species diversity. We like to make sure that our soils are in good shape, they're fertile, they're not degraded, there's not a lot of erosion on the site. And also, I know a lot of people get upset when they see dead trees. And every healthy forest I know of has dead trees, both standing and trees that have fallen over. So those trees are good, leave them out there. If half of the forest is dead, maybe it's not so healthy anymore. But we've really come to embrace large wood standing and fallen out there as great habitat for birds, insects, reptiles, all kinds of biodiversity that we have values.
And just thinking of that, you know, the photo of those floodplain forests and the riparian forests along creeks, large woody debris in streams is necessary for healthy salmon populations. And that's a major goal at the Land Trust, is to work on restoring salmon habitat. So, you know, it's broadly important and really important in a specific sense to a lot of our projects.
Yeah, so many of the properties with Skagit Land Trust are integrating upland and lowland ecosystems. So this integration between terrestrial and aquatic is critical. And that also is an important function in most of the low elevation forests in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, and I know just thinking about all of the different types of properties that we have, we're aiming for a lot of very different types of healthy forests. So we have some projects on Land Trust properties that we're going to be talking a little bit about and can highlight some of these concepts so that folks have a better understanding when we're looking at what's happening on these properties, what's threatening a healthy forest from, you know, or preventing it from developing, and what can we do to help move forests towards a future where we think that they should be and where they'll be healthy and you know, filling a role where they can support a diverse native ecological community.
Yeah, and I really applaud the Land Trust work because you've really taken on some big projects. I mean, starting from scratch, you know, starting from pasture land and making a forest out of it, which was what was there to begin with. And again, there's no recipe for this. There's no formula. So I know you're trying lots of different things.
Yeah, we're relying on a lot of good knowledge that's out there already, and work that people have done to understand what can, you know, lead to the kind of landscape that we want it to be. But at some point, you just need to jump in and try things out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us about the Bryan site?
Yeah. So you're looking at some photos and maybe some photos of the Bryan conservation area. Folks might be familiar with it. It's one of the Land Trust's earliest protected conservation areas, and it's located at the confluence of Swede Creek and the Samish River. And this property was donated to the Land Trust, and it had been agricultural fields before the Land Trust acquired it. So the first step of restoring forest on a property that had been converted into ag fields is just going out there and trying to get native plants established. So before my time at the Land Trust, there were some great projects focused on getting plants in the ground. But there are challenges anytime that you have a planting. And so at Bryan, you can see you're planting in grass, and grass competes with trees. So you have to do things to try and help those trees survive. We also had heavy beaver predation at this site. And so you can see folks working on a beaver exclusion fence to try and help those trees make it till they're big enough that the beavers can't take them out as easily. Though they'll still take some out, but you know, dead trees are good in some ways. The photo of folks working on a gate, if you look past that, you can see those trees are about 10 years old in that photo that are behind Michael. So that's an area where a lot of conifers were planted and started maturing. And the conifers, once we got those beaver fences up, did really well. And then in some of the other photos, you can see what happens as those conifer stands mature and keep doing well until they start to outcompete each other. And when you look into the understory, there's nothing else there, and the trees are becoming stressed, and they're competing too much for resources. There's not enough water potentially into the future, especially with climate change. And when trees are stressed, that can make them more susceptible to diseases or insect outbreaks. And this next slide is showing kind of what we tried to do out at Bryan. So the first step for us is always going out and getting to know our site. It's going out and watching it through the seasons so that we can understand what's really happening out there, and so that we anticipate problems before they become problems. The slide with all of us in our orange hats is me and Mark and Dave out there looking at the stand of really dense conifers and deciding what needs to happen next. So we implemented a thinning project where we went in and we thinned out a large portion of those conifers that had done really well. And we actually thinned them out to open up more space and increase the diversity and other species that are present in that stand, and increase the availability of sunlight and reduce competition for resources like water on the site. So in those photos, you can see some of what we were trying. We cut some of the trees down and we girdled some of them. And it really opened the site up, allowed sunlight in, put some of that woody debris on the ground. And the photo on the right side of your screen is showing what it looks like a year later. Some of the trees that we left, they're now doing better. They're growing faster. And the hardwoods are mixed in with those conifers now. So it's you get that diversity. You have different sizes and species. And the forest is going to start getting to a point where it can keep maturing and get a little healthier moving forward. And then we did a similar project at one of our Day Creek properties where we went out, evaluated the site with some foresters and folks who know a lot about trees and how to find signs of stress and what we might want to do with them. And this was another site where we'd gone out and established a dense restoration planting in an area that had been an agricultural field. And the photos at the bottom show the trees were even larger here. And again, they were really, they were dying back. So if you look at the trees in these stands, I didn't have photos that showed it very well, but you have dieback where the lower branches are all dying back towards the canopy. And when the tree dies back too much towards the canopy, it's a sign that the tree is not healthy and might not make it into the future. So our goal was to go through and reduce that competition. And so we went through and a WCC crew helped thin some of those trees, and volunteers helped girdle some of the trees. And we're excited to see what that looks like next year, because we just did that a couple months ago.
You know, Regina, the thing I love about these projects that you're highlighting here is your attention to detail. Mm-hmm. I think maybe 15, 20 years ago in the field of restoration, we would do some plantings and then walk away from it. But you do regular monitoring, you're tracking the health of these stands, and you're not afraid to do active management on these stands. If we let nature take its course in some of these situations, the forest would end up not quite as healthy, because if they're too dense, a lot more of those trees would die out there. Mm-hmm. So I really, really give you credit for doing that. That monitoring is a key component of all these restoration projects. Mm-hmm. And being willing to adjust the density of those stands is critical, because although during a winter like this wet winter we've had, it's hard to imagine the summer will ever come. Right. But summers are always dry, even on the west side. And that's the biggest challenge these trees face in getting established.
Yep. Yeah. And we've seen that, there are sites where we've had trees dying over the last few years because of the cumulative drought stress. I know a lot of members and landowners have reached out to us because they've observed that happening on different sites. So we're really trying to be proactive and anticipating what problems are coming. And when we're talking about the importance of monitoring, I think that's another spot where I really have to highlight the importance of our volunteer support, because again, so often we hear from our land stewards first when they say, I think we should look at this more carefully. They really go out, they get to know a property, and then they can often tell after some time there, if something's wrong, they can come to us and flag it for staff. And we try to keep our eyes open and on top of all these things, but we really appreciate that volunteer support as well for finding these sites where we need to take that active management forward. Another property that I'd like to highlight is our Diopsid Creek property. And I'll wait just 1 second because there's a train coming. Just in case you all can hear it. And the Diopsid Creek property is a property we acquired just a couple years ago. It's on Diopsid Creek up Highway 20 past Marble Mount. And it's a beautiful property. We've done some work out there because there was a home in really poor condition and kind of a home site that was impacted and had been cleared of trees. So there's a lot of mature forest that's in great shape on the property, but there were some openings that we wanted to do some work. So we went out and looked at the site, and there's a lot of native vegetation already present around the site. There's great diverse species. So our goal in this site was just to try to establish some pioneer tree species to help start filling it in. And then we were wanting to rely on some of the shrubs around it to volunteer themselves in. So with that in mind, we decided to stick with just one species that we were planting, Douglas fir, which is pretty drought tolerant. And the site can get really dry in the summer. But we used some tools out there that folks might be interested in. We used a seed lot selection tool, which is a great tool that's been developed and can help people understand. So you can look up and try to anticipate with climate change what the likely conditions are going to be on a site in 50 years, 100 years. Trees live a long time. The Douglas firs we plant on this property are going to be around 50 years, 100 years in the future, hoping. And so we want to find trees that are going to thrive in the conditions, both at the time that we're planting them and that 50 or 100 years into the future. So we can use this tool to run a model and get an understanding of where we should source our seeds from right now so that they match the conditions that the site will be experiencing into the future. And so on this site, we did this. We identified a couple of scenarios to get a range of seed sources out there. And we planted a native tree, but that's sourced from a wider range than just the Skagit Valley. And hopefully that helps make this a more resilient site where the trees are going to do better in the long run. And it was exciting to use this tool.
Yeah, so this is a great example of how you're looking ahead, not just what is here today, what was here in the past, but we know conditions are changing. We'll be facing this sort of non-analog climate future. So we don't know exactly what that looks like, but we can make some general guesses and try to adjust our management accordingly.
Yeah, and that's important. We always have a management plan for our properties, and anyone who has land that they're managing, it's really a great thing to create a management plan and articulate the vision and goals you have for your own property. And going through that process and learning more about the place that you are in is important for understanding, what is a healthy forest and what's threatening that forest, and what can you do. So I'd encourage anyone who has property that they want to manage well to put the time in to create that plan. Yeah. And then the adaptive element is really important too. We go through and we review our management plans and update them about every 10 years. So try to do it regularly. It would be great to do it even more often sometimes, but we've got a lot of conservation areas, so there's only so many we can do a year.
You have to have a plan if you're going to know where you're going. You have to have a roadmap, and you have to get boots on the ground. if possible, because you can't do it by Zoom,
Yep.
right? So we mentioned just a few minutes ago about the effects of dry summers on these forests. Now, that's a very important point I'm leading off on with this list here of some of the things that can challenge what we might consider a healthy forest. So we always have dry summers, but since 2015, we've had a few summers that were exceptionally dry, including 2021. We had almost 3 months with essentially little or no rain. So that is stressful for trees. It doesn't matter how much rain we get in the winter, by the time you get to August, all that water is used up, and then you get what you get in the summer. So that's our biggest concern. And as we get into more of a climate change situation with warmer summers, longer droughts, that's going to be our biggest challenge. And then how those droughts might relate to other kinds of disturbances, insects, wildfires, those sorts of things. Almost all of our lands have a significant amount of invasive species already there. We anticipate these will become perhaps a bit worse and worse over time. So wherever we do have these forest stands that have high densities, those are the places that will be most sensitive. I call that the climate change bottleneck. There's only so many straws you can put in the glass out there, and you have to remove a few of those straws so more of the trees have more of the water. And then Regina showed that slide of the seedling with the protector around it. You know, we can't forget about the things we need to be doing anyway, protecting against deer, beavers. You know, we love these animals, right? But they're really challenging. They like to eat young trees. And so we have to find that balance out there. Any other kinds of stressors that might be available, we need to eliminate. So if there's soil erosion or some other kind of local issue, let's take care of that as well, including the invasive species. And then you ended with your point there on long-term management. That is always the focus. We can adjust. I would think it's safe to say that not everything turned out exactly as you had hoped.
For sure.
But then you had options. You could turn, take another pathway, and that's a sign of a good resource manager. When you have some other tools in your toolkit, you're not just locked into this one linear way of thinking.
Yeah. And it really is, you know, that adapting as you go and learning from every project that you do on a site is so important. At Bryan, I think we talked about this a little bit, but I think we've done 3 different rounds of plantings out there to kind of lock in. And I think that this most recent round of planting is going to be really successful because we've learned so much from the first 2 that we did. And every time that you go out and you do something on a property, you're learning from it and you're adapting and tweaking the techniques that you use, your species list, your understanding of what will actually keep a beaver from eating your trees. And so as we've done projects over the years and learn a little bit from each project and each person that we work with, we're just getting more and more successful as we've been able to go on.
So you're describing what we've called for many years now, the adaptive management.
Yep.
But I'm starting to use the term, what we're really doing is building resilience.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what you call it, it's the same process. But we think about resilience more in the future because we know we can't hold off things like climate change. It's going to get hotter, it's going to get drier. So what are the things that we can do to ensure that we always have forests out there? And so we can take a look at some of the characteristics of healthy forests as a bit of a target for the future. Now, Regina already mentioned this idea of having a management plan. So that's the number one thing. You absolutely have to have that, but then you also have to read it frequently and revise it as needed. And also to communicate with your neighbors or the larger community of practice and restoration, which Regina is part of here. There's a big group of people doing these kinds of projects in Western Washington, and they really talk to each other quite a bit and communicate their successes and failures. And then that's how we are able to build resilience at large spatial scales, not just acre by acre. So some of the things that we'd like to focus on in terms of building resilience here are to ensure that our stand densities are appropriate for the site. There's no formula for this. Every site is different, every soil is different, so we have to pay attention to that. We need to have sufficient diversity out there so that we enable the forest stands to respond to whatever changes may come in the future in climate or other characteristics. And you mentioned this idea of expanding the genetic composition of your plantings. This is a brand new thing, and there's very little scientific data to support our managers out there on the ground. but we're trying some things. We're seeing what works out there with genetics, with species, and the structural diversity. So we aren't just planting trees in rows. We kind of screwed up the diversity by planting monocultures all over the Western Washington landscape in the past. And now we're trying to kind of rev up that diversity back to at least some semblance of what it used to be. Making sure we use species that are tolerant of low soil moisture. So that might mean, well, maybe we switch species a little bit, maybe not too far. We may not want to be transporting species around hundreds of miles where they haven't grown before, but to gradually kind of work this in, do some experiments. Control that herbivory, as we mentioned before, and then just do a really great job on monitoring. We cannot expect to predict what's going to happen 20 years, 40 years, or certainly not 100 years from now. But if we have conditions out there in the landscape where the trees can survive a good dry summer here on the west side, that's a good basis, a good foundation for having a long-term, mature, resilient forest.
Well put, Dave.
Okay.
Yeah. I think we'd love to open up for some questions, and we're happy to answer them. If folks would like to drop some questions in the Zoom chat, we'll be getting them and seeing if we can answer them and doing our best. Yeah.
We're scrolling back through to find them.
It sounds like there's already a few questions, so now we're just finding them in the list of questions.
First question. What is genetic diversity?
What is genetic diversity? That's a great question.
Okay, well, I can start that conversation on what is genetic diversity. So that simply addresses the scope of what's in the DNA of trees. You know, we may have heard of the Human Genome Project. We know quite a bit about the genetics of most of our common tree species based on decades of research over time, both in terms of digging into the microbiology of it, but also into how that genetic composition relates to the growth characteristics of trees. In general, the more diversity that we have in an organism, the greater capacity it will have to adapt to various conditions. There are exceptions to that, but that's why we emphasize this topic so much. We have, in general, over the last 40, 50 years, been planting tree species that have been grown for nursery stock in the same area where we're planting. And now we're saying, hold the phone, we're going to start expanding that. We might want to plant trees that have been grown from genetic stock farther south, with the idea that they may be more tolerant of warmer, drier conditions. So this is one way we can gradually expand the genetic diversity, even within species.
Yeah. And, you know, just to give a little more context, when I was talking about expanding the genetic diversity of the species at Diopsid Creek, after running the models and looking at kind of what was recommended for different areas, the trees that we planted at Diopsid Creek were from stock from the Willamette Valley and from southern Washington. So a couple different areas, but it doesn't take having to go very far to get that diversity that you could really help your trees in the future.
That's right. And we need to do some good monitoring on these trees now.
Yep.
And see how they perform in the future.
Yeah.
Then we can make recommendations to other people.
Yep.
We have a question. Has the perspective changed about how dense to plant trees initially in a restoration project?
Yeah, so the question was, has the perspective changed on how dense to plant trees in a restoration project? And that is an open topic right now. People are really discussing that. And the thought is, well, if we don't want our eventual stand densities to be so high because of this limitation on water, maybe we should just plant fewer trees. Whether or not that's appropriate depends a lot on the soils. It depends a lot on your objectives for the site in terms of what kinds of structural characteristics do you want in those stands. The one benefit of planting at relatively high densities is that it gives you options. Number one, in case not all of your seedlings survive. And number two, if you do go back in there and reduce or modify the densities, you get to make some choices as to how you do that, not just the number of trees, but the spatial configuration of the ultimate densities that are growing there. We're using this variable density concept more nowadays in forest management to increase habitat diversity for different types of animal species.
I have a couple more questions. These are going to combine two here. Are there rare tree species or different kinds of mycorrhizae that we might consider planting more of given the change in climate?
That's an interesting question.
So
Yeah.
this is a question that's asked often. It's should we be planting some other species? And we can look outside the window and anywhere in the town, we can see these beautiful redwoods. We see beautiful giant sequoias. We see other trees that don't grow around here. And so, why wouldn't we plant those? And I think at least at this point in time, it's good to be cautious about moving trees too far. There's a couple of things that can happen if you transfer plants too far. Number one is they may bring some diseases and insects with them that the local tree species are not adapted to, and vice versa. The trees that we're moving may be sensitive to local pathogens and insects. And sometimes we don't know the answer to that question until we plant a lot of trees. If we see a redwood here or there planted around town, they're probably fine. But what happens when we plant hundreds or thousands of trees? We don't always know the answer to that question. So my response is be cautious. If we extend the range of tree species, let's do that maybe within 100 miles or so, but not 500 miles, at least until we have more scientific data that will support our decisions to do that sort of thing.
I have a follow-up from that question asker. Seeing they were asking about trees that we would expect to find locally, but aren't very common right now.
So which of our local trees aren't particularly common? I had mentioned earlier about how we have modified the diversity of forests through timber harvest, and then a lot of the areas were not replanted. Where they were replanted, it was primarily Douglas fir, and we neglected some species. Sitka spruce is one on wetter sites. It was not perceived as a high value species, although it did have some values at some points in time. Western white pine is another one that has been neglected. So I always encourage people to plant Western white pine on drier, sunnier sites, knowing that you have to deal with this thing called white pine blister rust, which is an exotic pathogen that's very challenging. So you have to pay attention to that. And then there's all the understory species, Pacific dogwood, cascara, some of our less common species in wetlands like Pacific crabapple, black hawthorn. So these are some of our great native species that I don't even see planted very often in areas where people are really pretty keen on conservation and biodiversity.
Right.
But the good thing is our conservation districts have amazing plant sales. Between Skagit County, Snohomish County, you can get just about everything you need. There's a number of private nurseries too that supply these things. So I like to keep those in the mix as well.
Yeah, I do think that on a lot of restoration sites, there's a bias towards, some people call them restoration superstars. So plants that people feel more confident will do well. And I think it's good, sometimes you need that. If a site is challenging, you need something that will survive. But I think it's good as a practice for us to adapt down the road. Maybe some of those species are not going to do well if you try to plant them directly into an open grassy field.
Right.
But they might do well if you go in 20 years later when you thin out some patches and create gaps in the canopy, and you could plant them at that time and help reintroduce that diversity then. I think thinking about it on a longer time scale gives you more flexibility to make it work as well. If you try planting some of those species, they won't make it initially, but down the road, there's hope. Yeah.
And Regina, I want to put in a good word for a species that is getting a bad reputation lately, and that's Western red cedar. Because a lot of us saw Western red cedars that were suffering or even died since 2015 after that series of hot, dry summers. But I think there's still a great place for Western red cedar in our local forest. You just have to be attentive to the site.
Yep.
So western red cedar, I think, will generally always be a good option on north-facing aspects, in drainages, places where there tends to be higher soil moisture. So I think all of our native species should still be in consideration, even if the climate is getting warmer. We just have to pay even more attention to the finer scales of restoration and tree planting.
Definitely. And that, I think, goes back to knowing your site and exploring your site before you do the planting and finding those micro sites
Absolutely.
to make use of them.
Absolutely.
Just-
Yeah, there's no substitute for knowing your land.
Yep.
And checking it often because things change.
And we have one last follow-up to the mycorrhizae question, which is, are there some that are better adapted to drier conditions than others that are native?
Yeah. Yeah, so the question was about mycorrhizae. Are there some that are better adapted to drier conditions? And first of all, mycorrhizae are an extremely diverse group of organisms. Mycorrhizae are a fungi that facilitate transfer of nutrients from the soil into the roots of plants. There's almost no plant out in the woods that doesn't have some type of mycorrhizal association. And so there's been a lot of concern about how that might be affected by a warmer climate. And there certainly are some strains that are more or less drought tolerant. But the key is, to which species are they associated? Some mycorrhizae are rather specifically associated with individual species. Some mycorrhizae are more generalists, and they can associate with multiple species. And we don't know a lot about how that all works in general. But I think it's something to pay attention to. It's another thing that you could add to your monitoring list in the future to do some soil sampling.
Would be really interesting.
Check out the soil microbiota. And again, this is something we need more scientific data on to really make a good statement about it.
And there's some really exciting and innovative research happening right now. So people are learning a lot and finding, you know, there's a lot of potential applications outside of creating resilient forests. So I think that there's a lot of attention that will benefit our efforts to manage forests more responsibly and kind of with that in mind in the future too. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for chatting with me tonight and for helping everyone learn a little bit more about healthy forests in our area.
And thank you for your good work at the Land Trust here.
Thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Dave. That was really great. And I know that a lot of people are going to be running out to the native plant sales. It's going to be great. I think I'm supposed to move back in here. So for those of you at home, we are at the end of our program. What we're going to do, though, is turn on everyone's videos. We wanted to give you a heads up about two upcoming events. Those slides coming up. One moment, please. One. It says 1, 2, 3. Okay. The Anacortes Community Forest Lands Easement Walk is happening this upcoming Saturday, and I hear there's still spaces. And actually, the walk is to learn about the resilient community protected forest. So talking about what Dave and Regina have been talking, looking at the trees and talking about what makes a resilient forest. So that's on the ground there. You can sign up on our website, right? Yep. Okay.
That's a good place where monitoring is being done.
Yeah, right, because you're doing all that monitoring there. It's great. The second one is our open house, and it's going to be up at a incredible property that I bet most of you haven't been to. We call it Marble, and it's just on the little bit west of the town of Marble. Beautiful property along the river, and we're going to be holding our open house there July 23rd. So save the date. It's from 10 to 2. We'll talk. There's trails there. We'll talk about the forest. I'm hoping we get a taco truck. I haven't talked to Laura yet. Music, and a staff meet and greet. We'd love to see you there. There'll be a sign-up sheet for you to sign up on that. But that's a forest that the previous landowners before we bought it had really taken a lot of care and have planted a ton of different species. And it's really interesting to see how those species are doing upriver. So we hope that you'll join us there. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your support. Thank you for making all this work. And we're going to open up the Zoom now. And so that if anyone has questions or want to say hi to each other or chat, it's the end of our presentation. So if you want to sign off, feel free to do that too. But if you want to stay on, we'll hang around for a little bit.